Samech Vav, evening of Kaf Dalet Tevet, Tavshin Samech Chet, page Kuf Gimel. Kuf Gimel, Kuf Dalet.
All right. So we saw the mamutza of Keser B'Klau, and we saw that the mamutza of Keser, the two madrigas of Atik and Arich, they were be'ikah a mamutza between the Ein Sof Hamatzil, the Ein Sof how he's Lamaila from the whole union of the spheres, even from Keser. That means Atzmas Ein Sof, to the Ner Tzalim, to the spheres, how they come about in Atzilas. So for that we had to have a mamutza, because the spheres, the way they are, compared to the pshitas of the Ein Sof, Lamaila Mikeser, then that's a yin of an Ein Aroich completely. And therefore we had to have a mamutza with the two madrigas of Atik for Arich. And we spoke at great length about the madriga of Arich, Atik, and how the whole moshel of the Maturgiman. Then we saw that there was another mamutza, that Keser was also, or we saw Dugma Me'ain, the yin of Keser, a mamutza between Ein Sof and Neshomes as well. And we saw that that was a different type of mamutza, in that it wasn't that the Elyoin went down through a series of Yeridas, Midarga Ladarga, to the Tachtoin, but the Tachtoin was Oile Chotzi Haderach, half of the way, and the Elyoin was Yored, also Chotzi Haderach, even though it's not correct to say that the Elyon went down half of the derech, because the Elyon goes down how he is Balavochi. He remains the same. But the Ikka is that the Taktan came up half the way, and they met in the middle. We brought down a whole Indian of the different ways that a alien could be yored, and that here we meant that the alien was yored davki b'atzmusay, to the middle point, and we saw the whole connection with the bris that the Eibishter made with the Yidden, which we read in Pasha Netzovim, this for Rosh Hashanah, Le'ovrecha b'bris Hashem Elakecha. We saw that was the idea of what Yidden were oile, and they came the Ovrecha, for them to pass and to be elevate themselves from one madrega to the other. And they met in the middle, which was Arich, or they met having elevated themselves to that madrega. The Ein Sof was Shishpilas Atzmei, he came down, B'Yerida Milmaila Lamata, and they met in the middle, as we quoted from the Maimorim in Likutei Torah. That's where we were holding, and we said that was the Indian of the mamutza, but again to the Neshomets. So I think we're holding in these Sfarim on Omid Kuf Gimel, about more than 2/3 of the way down, not far from the bottom of the page, even more than that, 3/5 or 4/5 all the way down the page. We saw that Omnam Zeo Davke Kasher Hishpilis Atzmei Kaviocho, that the Eibishter caused himself to come down, Bibchinas Atik, Vahainu Liyei Shalidei, Bibchinas Yeridas Ein Sof, Bibchinas Atik, Im Hiyose Bibchinas Hatoches Hamahus, even though that means that the Eibishter brought himself down, Mamish Kamoishuhu, as we saw, the whole concept of Atik is Mamish the Bechina Taktoina Shebamatzio. Just we saw that it was an Inif and an Akuda, but compared to the Pshitas of the Ein Sof, but nonetheless it is the Mahus Elakus of the Eibishter himself. Mikol Mochim Harihu Nas B'chinas Mamutza, Ayochol Liyes Alidei Zeh, his Chabras B'chinas, his Chabras the Ein Sof B'Neshomes Yisrael. That therefore there can be the meeting point in the middle of the Neshomes with the Indian of the Ein Sof. Ukashem, so now we're now continuing the Lashon of the Maimah. Ukashem shakeser u b'chinas mamutza bein Ein Sof ha'ma'atzil el haner tzolim. Just like the keser is a mamutza between the Eibishter and the ner tzolim. And we saw that was the Iker Inyan of Keser, was to bring the Eibishter, first of all, Kaviochel, to the spheres how they are in Atzilus, what they call Ner Tzalim. K'moi kein, Bechinas Atzilus, Beklal, Harizeh Mamutza, Bein Ein Sof HaMa'atzil, Ela Nivroim, Kiyadua. Now, we're making now another step downwards. So, Lefizeh, even though we talk about Keser a lot in this, the truth of the matter is that Lefi, the whole Havana that we have here in this whole sugya, Keser is really a detailed step, and the Ikar Inyan of Keser is to unite the Pshitas of the Eibishter with Olam HaAtzilus. What that means, the Ner Tzalim, the Spheres. And therefore the word Ner Tzalim always refers to the Spheres of Atzilus. Then, that only takes us down as far as Olam HaAtzilus, down as far as what you might call the Sof of Olam HaAtzilus, which is Malchus, but that's all within the world of Gilui Elakus. As the one that Atzilus is not yet Nivro, Chas v'Chodila, it's only a Gilui of detailed koiches within the Eibishter himself, Kaviochel, which is the spheres, and we haven't yet reached the level of what we call Nivroim, created worlds, Yesh Mi'ayin, we haven't reached that yet. And those worlds created, Yesh Mi'ayin, are called Nivroim. Yeah, from Lashon Nivro, from the word Boirei, what the word Boirei means, already a separate world which has become about in the form of a created entity, Yesh Min Ho'ayin. And how do we reach that? How do we make a mamutza if we're going to say that the Sphere is the Atzilus, Ein Arech Lagabi the Pshitas of the Ein Sof, then that's for sure the Gimel Elamas Bria Yetzir Vasiya, that for sure Ein Arech Alachas Kama V'Chama, that there Ein Arech Lagabi the Eibishter. So therefore we have to have another mamutza in order to reach on the lower side the union of the Nivroi. That further mamutza, or that is Olam HaAtzilus itself. The whole union of Olam HaAtzilus, or that is a mamutza between Chochma Datzil, or between Keser, how it's already become a direct market to Chochma through the mamutza of Keser itself, and the beginning of Olam HaBriya, which is the first Briya Yesh Mi'ayin. The mamutza between them is Olam HaAtzilus itself. And that's what he says. V'yesh b'zeh gam kein b'chinas Yerida. I'm sorry. K'moi kein b'chinas Atzilus b'klal hari zeh mamutza bein Ein Sof HaMa'atzil ela nivro im. Created worlds which are a form of a yesh, and they're a yesh mi'ayin, separate kaviochel as it were from Elikus, or they come about to another mamutza, which is Olam HaAtzilus b'klal. V'yesh b'zeh gam kein b'chinas Yeridas ha'atzmas kaviochel liyesh b'chinas mamutza. We need, since ultimately we're talking about creating al yedei the Eibishter himself worlds, Bria Yetzir Vasiya, then we're going to have the koyach of the Eibishter and bi'atzmei somehow or another linking into this mamutza, and then the other side of the mamutza will be a Gilui Elakus, which is already shak to the Nivroim. But how do we bring the Eibishter himself that he should have some sort of kesher in this lower mamutza, which is Olam HaAtzilus? So the Rebbe Vahainu, that's the Yerida of that Atzmus to take part in the mamutza of Atzilus. Hainu mashu pnimius Abba hu pnimius Atik. Or we learned before that in the pnimius of Spheres HaChochma, Abba means Chochma, the Chochma of Atzilus. In the pnimius of Chochma, then we have pnimius Atik. The pnimius Atik Atzmei zehu mashu ne'atach v'nivdale like Amrei. Yeah, the union from Atik that's shayked how it was in Keser Mamish. In other words, that was the Hatochas HaMahus of the Eibishter. So therefore, compared to the Madrega of Atzilus Bechlal and also the Chochma, then it's Nertach V'Nivdal Legamri. The Inyan von Atik, particularly how it is in its own Madrega of Atik, aber al idei shenimshe b'chinas chochma nase b'chinas mamutza. But when Atik comes down, and albeit it's a very special form of Yerida, and it enters the Madrega of Chochma, then al chaponim it becomes the first point of a mamutza. It enters the union of a mamutza. Just like we saw in Keser Tel, that al idei what the pnimis of the Ein Sof enters the union from Atik, it becomes already shy to be a mamutza. It becomes the first elevated point of the mamutza. So in the same way, Atik itself goes down all the way into Chochma, and that's albeit a sizable form of Yerida for the Inyan von Atik. However, it remains what it is. It remains Atik, but nonetheless, that Yerida causes it to become the first side of a mamutza. It enters Chochma, and through that it becomes the beginning of a mamutza. Ukiyadua, as is well known, the base beginnes of a mamutza, the Atzilas, heim beginnes Chochma Iloah, Chochma Ta Torah. As is well known that the two extremities of the mamutza in Atzilas are Chochma Iloah and Chochma Ta Torah. Now, Chochma Iloah, well, that is another name for Chochma of Atzilus. Elevated or high Chochma, that's Chochma as the first sphere of Atzilus. Chochma Tatorah means Malchus. Chochma Tatorah is another name for Spheres HaMalchus. And in Spheres HaMalchus, particularly, that's the Inyan of Dibur Sheba Malchus. Kaviyachol, the way the Eibishter speaks out, the Inyan of Oisius Hadibur, what they give rise to the actual creation of the Nivroi. In other words, that there's a koyach, kol inside Chochma Iloah, which is the koyach of Atik, as we saw, that's going all the way down into Chochma Iloah, and that gives the ability for there to be a connection between the highest point in Atzilus with the lowest point, because Spheres HaMalchus is the lowest point in Olam Atzilus. It's the last of the spheres, and particularly the Inyan von Dibur in Malchus. Well, that's already what we call Chitzonius HaMalchus. That's already Malchus that's going out into a Gilui Michutz LaAtzilus, which is the Nevroim, and that has the ability to make these oisias, these divine speech, which has the ability to bring about the Nevroim, because it is Makabel, it's koyach from the Atik hidden inside Chochma Iloah. And as well known, we see even by the Odom that the genuine ability to produce letters and to speak really comes from Pnimis HaChochma. It's not from any other power in our souls, but Be'emes it comes from Chochma. Like the Alter Rebbe explains that in Tanya at great length in the famous Igeros HaKodesh chapter Hey. But at the beginning of Igeros HaKodesh, over there the Alter Rebbe is masbir how if we examine things carefully, we see that our speech really comes from the koyach HaChochma Sheba Nefesh, and in that gufa, the pnimis of Chochma, a high level in Chochma, because we see that when you talk, most of what happens is not rational. The formation of the oisias and the way they come out and everything is all something you don't really know yourself how you do it. You just produce these combinations of letters, and the rotzen of the nefesh, or even the etzem of nefesh, sort of promotes you to have letters and all of a sudden to combine them together. Because we notice when you talk, you don't spend a lot of time working out how you're going to say. You work out what you want to say, but all the rest of the dibur comes from a very high level inside us that makes us able to give these things out. And that's exactly what happens to Lamaila. Oh, but that happens to Lamaila mitzad the Pnimis Atik, which is hidden inside the Pnimis Abba, and that causes it to come out in the form of Dibur. And that's the two extremities of the Mamutza. Yeah, the Mamutza is really the Atik inside Chochma, which is like, by us, the Pnimis of our Chochma, which is linked with the Etzem HaNefesh in a way, which is also a form of Atik inside us, and then it goes down into the Inyan von Dibur. But that's what's mavur over there in Torah. If you look up, the old Torah is mavur, the two extremities of Chokhmah and Dibur. And he says that Indian of Dibur, that's the Chokhmah Tatoa, as it's called. And the reason why Dibur is called Chokhmah Tatoa, Dibur is not Chokhmah, it's another thing, because without Chokhmah Eloah, you wouldn't be able to talk. And therefore, really what is happening is that the Chokhmah Eloah, the emes of Pnimis of Chokhmah, has gone over and translated itself into Dibur, and therefore it's called Chokhmah Tatoa. In other words, that Malchus is really a form of guided Chokhmah. It's like a form of guided Chokhmah into another koyach to reveal into. Therefore, see that Shlomo HaMelech, he's called the infant Chokhmah's Chochem Mikol Adam, but he was a Melech. He was the infant Sfiras HaMalchus, Kemavur in many places, and therefore Mashiach is connected with David HaMelech, the infant Malchus, and the Rambam writes that Mashiach must come from David Shlomo. In other words, it has to be not only David, but also Shlomo, but he's the perfection of Sfiras HaMalchus, and therefore he was a perfection of wisdom. The greatest Chochem mentioned in Scripture was Shlomo HaMelech, because he's the Gilui of Pnimis HaChochem. Validei Atzilas, that's the two aspects of Atzilas. Yuchel Lishachid Beis Afochim. And through this mutzah of Atzilas, then there occurs a much greater chiddush, that not only two high and very separated be'erach madregas can unite, but he said here we have a yichud of beis hafchochim, two things which are mamish opposites altogether. Hainu hamatzil elyoin ein seiporachu, well that's atik, how he's sitting inside chokhmah. Im hanivroim the bi'ah bria yitzira vasir, what nivroim are mamish yesh, the things that feel themselves separate from Elikus, and Kaviochel, the Avish has made them separate from him in a form of yesh minho ayin. That's complete and opposite antitheses, and opposite entities, absolutely. So there was the Rebbe Nimtza that this mamutza of Atzilas really achieves what the other mamutza of Keser doesn't really achieve. In other words, it links two things which are absolute hafochiyim. So therefore we have to say that Davke, when Atik goes down into Chokhmah Tatoa, and it enters, that there is revealed a new power of the Atzmus of the Eibush, the Mamish, which hiddenly enters into that, and what you might call inspires the whole function of Chokhmah Tatoa. And that's what we see, that Dafki in certain functions of Sfiras HaMalchus, all of a sudden the Atzmus of the Eibush reveals himself in a way which is not Lafi Seder HaMadregas, but it's this whole concept of the link of the two extremities carrying with them the koyach of the Atzmus in order to bring about something which is absolutely hafuch mi elakus, kavioho. And yet nonetheless it happens. That's another level. That's already a third concept in Mamutza. First of all, we've seen the Etzem Mamutza from Keser. Then we saw the Mamutza, how Keser functions Lagabit Neatzolim. And then we saw there was this union of Nishamas Yisrael. And then we mentioned here this union of the Mamutza of Atzilus Lagabit Nivroim. Now the Rebbe is going to say that there's another way that we'll soon come to. We just got to finish off here another sentence. Ubamoki macher mavua. This is in one of the works of the Mittler Rebbe. It's mavua the achibu, or the joining together in olam atzilas, the mamutza in olam atzilas, hu alidei chochmo bina. The bina nikras shchinta iloa ayin shom. I'm sorry, Al Shem, according to the name, She Mishachenes Chulu, Harizeh Shayach El Hatachtei. Ukiyadua de Ike Bechinas Mamali Kol Almin Hu Mibchinas Bina. So the Mittler Rebbe is Masbir that you don't need to go all the way down from Chochma Iloa into Chochma Tatoa. Right in the beginning of Olam Atzilus, you've already got a joining together of two koichos and entities, but they already represent this joining together of Atik with the Nivroim of Olam Habriya v'Yitzira. And he says that that's in Bina. In other words, Enoch Harami Chochma carries in itself Pnimis Atik, but you don't need to go all the way down into Malchus. Well, I mean, you do, because you're not going to get anything unless you get down to Malchus. But he says that the whole, as it were, what you might call trick, or the whole activity has already taken place in Bina. Because he says that Chochma and Bina, they have a very special yichud together, as is well known, but they are very different. They're very different entities, very, very different and opposite entities. And their inyan is to function like we just described Chochma Iloa mit Chochma Tatoa. And that's what he says, that Bina, according to the Kabbalah, is called Shchinta Iloa. And that's Al Shem Shemishachenes. Now what does he mean by the word Mishachenes? That means that it causes to dwell. Bina causes the divine lights to dwell in the Tachtonim. And therefore the Alter Rebbe in Perik Nun Aleph and Nun Beis in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings down that the word Shechina is from Mishachenes, it causes them to dwell and come down into the lower world. Therefore the word Shechina is from the word to dwell. It means to dwell in a lower state. So therefore Bina is called Shchinta Iloa. It's called Shechina on its higher Madrega. Because Malchus is also called Shechina, as he writes over there in Tanya. Malchus is also the Ika Shechina. However, it's called Shechinta Tatoa. That's already, Malchus is already the Shechina, in other words, the divine light, how it's already ready to go over into the Tachtoini Mamish. And it's mashpia into the Nivroim. However, he said the whole thing began in Bina. That Bina took the unbelievable koyach of Atik that there is in Chochma, and it made it already ready to become what would eventually be the oil that goes into the Nivroim, already in Bina. And therefore Bina is called the high Shechina, the higher level of the Shechina. Ultimately speaking, it's already shaykh to the Tachton, even though it's still in Bina. The Ike Beginners Mamale Kol Almin, the Ike Madrega of the divine light entering all the Nivroim, the Pnimius, and being mashpia into them, or that's in Bina. Who Mipchinas Bina? V'alkein Shom in Bina Makoim Hachibo Ima Erein Seif HaMeir B'Chochma. So we can say that Chibur, joining together of the Atik, which is found in Chochma, together with the Sphira of Bina, that's already achieved for Lepoel, all that I need, and later it's only a question of taking it down for the other Spheres until eventually it will reach in Malchus and go over. But in Bina itself has already occurred the Ika Inyan. V'hainus of the Rebbe de Olam ha'atzilas atzilusoi zu b'chinas mamutza. The whole bringing about and the whole bringing near and the revelation of the Eibishter of Olam Atzilas was for the sake of this mamutza. Ub'b'chinas zu yucholiyos is chabres. And in this b'china of the mamutza of Olam Atzilas, there can be the joining together of Atik with the Nivroim. Just as we saw, it can be on two levels. Either we'll talk about it on a practical level, Chochma Iloa, Chochma Tatoa, or we can say that on a delicate level and on a way that already is achieved and clinched the main deal, it's a connection between Atik in Chochma with Bina. Now, why would that be? And why would the Rebbe say that Bina, this is an episode, a bigger riches from the Mittler Rebbe, that Bina is what he writes here already, Shayach El Tachtoin. And he says that the Ike Mamale Kol Almin is in Bina. Yeah, the Ike of the Mamale Kol Almin is in Bina. So, the reason for that is, we see that when a mensch is masig new haskola in Chokhmah, then to a certain extent that's not him. It's not his koyach. It's not him. But that's something which is given to him by a koyach elyon. In other words, when you receive something in Chokhmah, you say, "Oh, yeah, now I got it." You don't really have it. You do, but you don't. You've had this tremendous illustration and illumination in yourself, but you're not able to explain it. All they say is, "I got it." But somebody says, "No, could you tell me what you got?" I say, "I've got to take time. It's going to have to go through other processes, but the illumination has occurred." So Chassidus says that that's not your doing. That's the Etzem HaNefesh has popped it into you. And that you can see. You may not understand it for hours. And all of a sudden, boom, all of a sudden you get it. And that means that literally, that's like a giving downwards from a very high level in the Nefesh to you. Yeah? And that's called Chokhmah. And that's eating for Koyach, but it's Ma. It's really something higher than you. And however, when it gets into Bina, then if you don't become in charge of the matter, then you're losing out. You're not really using your Bina. And Bina doesn't make anything new to you, but it develops and expands and shows you what you got. It doesn't alter the basic direction. But what it does is it opens it all up into details. It can even relate it to other matters, can even ask a question from another matter, and it'll settle the whole thing for you. And then you say, "Oh, what do you say then?" You say, "I got it." You say, "I have it." And if you don't, then you're not really using your Bina. Which means that you as a lower Tachtoin, who didn't know anything about it, had no shaykhus klal to that Indian, all of a sudden you say, "I got it." In other words, you become the balabos over the Indian. Well, that means that it's gone from a state of being given to you, even where you are still ein arech to it, and now you become as it were, you become the owner of the Indian, and therefore you can take it down and give it into your midas. And you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to give it into your midas. You're supposed to arouse Ava, give it to Hashem from these things that you understood, and then eventually it'll go out into Dibba. You'll talk about these things. You'll be mashpirim to others. So ultimately, it reaches what we call Chokhmah Torah, which is Dibba. But the whole trick, the change from the ayin into the yesh, occurred when Chokhmah went over into Bina and allowed you to have it in Bina. Well, that's the real difference between ayin and yesh, and all the rest of it is just like a long and delicate process to eventually reach the real yesh. But the delicate yesh has already been reached, because you legabi that Indian, how it was in Chokhmah, you're a yesh, and that's a state of ayin.
How long does it take for a person to get idea from Chokhmah?
Everybody's different. My boy, somebody who's very, very polished, and somebody who's very, when I say polished, I mean that he's really worked very hard. By him, it can be very swift. You follow? Almost in a second, he can take it already from Chokhmah into Bina. Yeah, others need more time. Others need to work at it and to sit and be on their own and not be disturbed and ask if should help and all sorts of things. And then gradually it comes down into Bina.
I'm asking how long does it take to get all the way down Mesa?
Well, once again, depends who you are. You understand? If you're a schlepper, it might take years. You understand? In other words, if you learned that Indian, you knew about it, but you didn't bring it into midas. You understand? You left it alone. And later on, some other time in life, we'll say, "Oh, wow, really, the Avishta meant something with this. It was really meant for some Indian. The reason I understood that was really for a great." And then you get, rather belatedly, but you get cracking. You get working with the Indian, and you bring it down to somebody who's, like I said, very masudar, very into Hashem. Then he'll bring it from the Chokhmah, and he'll get it swiftly into his Bina, and then he'll start working at his midas, and then he'll start talking about it. And he'll be full of chayas from the whole Indian, and then Mamela, it'll even affect his Maisa. It'll even come out Mamish into Maisa Bapoyo, that he'll do things differently because he understood that way, and he'll act differently, and he'll affect the world around him differently, and he'll bring Dira B'tach Toinim. And nowadays we've got to really get cracking and really get moving, and we've got to bring the emes of Dira B'tach Toinim. Take it from me, Umiyad. So that's basically the picture why the Rebbe says that once you go from Chokhmah into Bina, that's already called Shechina. No, it's not yet Shechina to the Emes. Shechina is Malchus. It's called Shechina Eloah. It's already began to dwell in the lower thing because you became the Balabas and you are like the lower. You are the Yesh. You are the beginning of the whole process. Yeah, of Yesh. Well, hopefully you're only a very delicate Yesh. And you've got to take it down further until it comes into Olam HaPoyel, either through Dibba and eventually through Maisa. That's what the Rebbe says. But that's the union of Olam HaTzilas, that it's whole bringing about Atzilut Say. The whole reason why the Eibishter brought about, he brought close to himself, literally, the union of Olam HaTzilas, was in order to fulfill this Mamutza, in order that there should be the joining up of the Nivroim, the Emes Yesh, with the union of Elikus. Okay? We've seen now the further development of the whole concept of a Mamutza. So we've seen like three concepts in Mamutza. Vehine said the Rebbe, we're going to now see another nuance. Vehine Yedua Sha'atoira Hi Gam Kein Mamutza Bein Atzmasay in Seif L'Nishamas Yes Ruel. Now here we were talking about how Yidden can elevate themselves and they go from one level to another in elevating themselves into the level of Arich we saw, and then Atzmas comes down, and that was the union from Brius and the Overcha Brius. The Rebbe said there's another way that Neshamas can make a connection with the Eibishter in the form of a Mamutza, but in a much deeper way, Torah, through learning Torah. And once again, not just through sitting with your feet up and looking at a book in Torah or something, but mamish through learning Torah and devoting oneself to it. V'hainu said the Rebbe, Vehine, Torah hi gam ke mamutza, ukemaima, tlas kishron miskashroin do be do. This is a statement of the Zohar Kodesh in Chelik Gimel, and this is a very controversial and well-known theme in the Zohar Kodesh. Tlas, three knots are tying themselves door by door, this to this, one to the other, door by door. What are the three knots? Yisrael miskashrim boiraisa, Yidden tie themselves up to the Torah, voiraisa b'kutchabrichu, and the Eibishter, and the Torah joins up into the to the Eibishter. So we see that you got on one extremity Yidden, in the middle you have the Torah, and on the other extremity you have the Eibishter, Kodesh Baruch. It's a man yet that if you look carefully, then there seems only to be two Kishorim, not three. In other words, that Yidden tie themselves to the Torah, and the Torah ties itself into the Eibishter. So why did he say Tlas Kishron? Why did he say three knots, Mishkashrin Dor B'Dor? So that's a big question that occurs in many Maimorim, but for reasons that it's not really our discussion here, the Rebbe doesn't go into it. I'll suffice it to say, let's say there's a third kesher somewhere, because the Zohar Kodesh said there are three knots, so it's Mavur and considers that there is a third knot.
Within the Mamutza.
Huh?
Within the Mamutza.
The what?
Within the Mamutza, no?
The thing of the Mamutza.
Within the Mamutza. Within the Mamutza.
Yeah, but we're not talking about now, we're talking about the Torah now. That's in Olam HaTzilas. What we're saying is that Yidden tie themselves up into one knot, and then the Eibishter, through the fact that Yidden are tied into Torah, and Torah is tied into the Eibishter, and they make the connection. So there's only two knots. There's not three knots. So the answer is that there really are three knots, but that's a bit of an ariches. That's a very bekitzer nimrat. What it means is that it's mavur in those drushim. It says when they talk about this inyan, it's mavur, and the Zohar Kodesh itself says that we're really talking about different madregas. We're just the general statement, but actually the Zohar Kodesh goes into more length, and it says in every level there's pnimius and chitzonius and dargin al dargin. There's like levels higher than other levels in each of these three entities, and the way that they join also, it would appear. In other words, it can be connected with chitzonius and partly with pnimius, or it can be completely with pnimius, or partly with chitzonius. It's all dargin al gabi dargin. So what that means is that there's a certain kesher of Yidden with the Eibishter, which is an atzmistic kesher, and that's kilu mitzad the very mile of the neshamas themselves, even in a way without the Torah. So what happens is that when the Yidden connect themselves to the Torah, and the Torah connects them to the Eibishter, that wakes up in Yidden a tremendously atzmistic power that there is inside the neshama, and then that goes back round the what you might call the back way, and that links up everything together, and that sort of causes a new atzmius in all the different kisharim. In other words, once Yidden reveal what their real pneumistic koyach is, they make everything else change. And that's what the Zohar means by saying it's all pneumis v'chitzenius and dargin agabi dargin. In other words, the third kesher is there, but it's a hidden klolistic kesher, which is really mitzad Yidden. But anyway, that's a big statement, which we're going to see later on in this minor towards the end. That there's a certain thing about Eden which is higher than everything. It's even higher, as it were, than the Torah. And there's a inyan between Eden and the Eibishter, which is a very, very essential connection. And the Torah is a way of making that connection function after the Eibishter is given the neshamas what to do. There's a certain inyan where he has a tainug in the neshamas, even just mitzad what they are. So we'll see that as we go along. So therefore, that's the inyan of the Gimel Kishrin, which are mishkashrin do v'do. Shalidei Torah, that when Yidden connect themselves with the Torah, nasi yichud v'chibud and neshamas Yisrael ba'erein. See. So when you learn Torah, then you become joined up through the Torah to the Eibishter, meaning that the Torah is a mamutza to join the neshamas with the Eibishter. In other words, slightly different than what we said earlier. But Torah yesh beis bechinas. In Torah there are two states or aspects. Oita oirke ukemeshkasu, oita oirke salmo. That's a pasuk in the Rosh Chodesh Kapitel in Tehillim, Kapitel Kuf Daled. We say that Boch Inavji Gedalta Me'ed, and then we say Oita Eir Kesalma Noite Shomayim Kaya Kiyariya. Literally, Oita means to put on like a talit, atifo, like you enclose light around the world in the form of a garment. Like a talis. A salma means like a long garment. In other words, that you encompass the whole creation with a light which is like a salma. So the Rebbe says, that those two inyonim, oir v'salma, light and garment, they're two states or bechinas inside Torah itself. And they are pnimius v'chitzenius. The neshamas Yisrael oilim ad bechinas hasalmo. That the Yidden elevate themselves to a profound kesher with the chitzenius, and they reach from the chitzenius as much as they can towards the pnimius. But that's the type that they go up through and into the state of the garment of bechinas atzmas oirein seiparuchu yoideru mashpiu bechinas ha'oyer shebesalmo. In other words, the Eibishter comes down from into the oyer which is inside the salma. In other words, from that it's mashma that the oyer and the salma are united together. They're not two separate inyonim. Meaning that inside the chitzenius is anyway made the pnimius, that the very oyer, the light and the illumination, but that's the pnimius, that is anyway made and connected in the chitzenius. So if you reach as much as you can inside the chitzenius, which is the salma, then you anyway make contact with the oyer which is inside the salma. In other words, in all these madrigas, you can't talk about them as being completely and utterly separated one from the adya. Now, every bechina has in itself a certain trace and a iskalus of the higher bechina. So therefore, inside the salma, there's already a certain gilu of the pnimius of Torah, even inside the chitzenius as well. Now, in many places from the Rebbe Melech Mashiach. So therefore, once you elevate yourself as much as you can in the Salma, then the Eibusha comes down and he enters the Indian for the Panemias, the oil which is inside the Salma. Vadi Dezer, who ayichud the Bechinas Atzmeser in Seif, the Bechinas Atzmeser in Seif, Shoyra umizgala b'nishamas yis roel. In other words, that Adi Dezer, the Eibusha makes a contact with what the Yidden have reached, and they join up with him, and then through that they eventually are oiler into the Emesa Pneumias. And like we said earlier, Osid Lovey, the Neshamas will dafkin be masik, the highest in Pneumias, as we'll see as we go along. And that will be the gili of the whole Tami Torah and everything which will be Osid Lovey. That's how that we first of all go into the Salma, and in the Salma we meet the oil which is in the Salma, and then we go up purely into the oil. So it follows the feature that when a Yid learns Nigla Shabbat Torah, and he learns it Erlach, and he learns it Mitzad the Pnimis HaKavona, and he knows that hidden that is the Pnimis HaTorah, and in Pnimis HaTorah is the Eibishter, Mamish, Pnimis of the Eibishter, then he forms a connection with the Oyer inside the Salma. And how much more so if he actually learns Pnimis HaTorah, Dainuk Siddhas, and he begins to understand a bit of the Oyer, how it is in BMS, so then for sure he reaches the Oyer inside the Salma, and through that he makes a connection. And like the Zohar Kodesh says, Kula Dag in Pnimis Hitanius, Dag in Al Gabi Dag. In other words, that you make a connection ultimately with the Pnimis of the Eibushter Mamish, through the Indian of Pnimis HaOyer, which is anyway Meir in the Salma. He said that's the Yichud, but now he says a most amazing thing, and we'll deal about this in more detail as we go along. Uki Adua Toira Nikras Bris. It's one on the Torah is called a Bris. Eilu Divrei HaBris, what that's written in Parsha Kisovai, right near the end of the Torah, after the rather shaking section, which is called the Teichacha, after the retributions, immediately after that is written Eile Divrei HaBris. In other words, that the Torah is called a covenant. And then there's another pasuk, Al Pi Advarim Ha'ele Koras Hashem Imochem Bris. But that's written in Parsha Kisiso, in Shmois, after the Yin of Matan Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu says that according to these matters, Torah, the Eibusha has made with you a covenant, a bris. The Indian Chris is bris, the Torah, who she'ein dova hamafsik beinayim, she'mischabrim b'chinas ha'atzma seirein sheip Shabbat Torah, k'meishikosu b'mokim acher. And he said, what is the Indian from a bris? A bris means a joining together of two parties, a iskastra, how they call it, becoming one of two parties. That's what the idea of a bris is. So he said that through learning Torah and going up into your portion that you can reach of the Oyer inside the Salma, then you make a connection, Mamish, with the Eibishter, that he's come down from his side, and there's a linking together, which is that the Neshamas join directly in the sense that there's nothing interrupts between them. Shemishchabrim b'chinas ha'atzmas וכמש כוסו במוקים אחר וזהו ההפרש בין בחינס הממוצע השייך לא אילמס להמוצע דאיר אין ספר נשומס ישראל, how it is according to the Torah, the Kavanah here. זהו ההפרש, that's the difference. באילמס הממוצע מפסיק ביניהם, ומה שנמשך באילם הוא בחינס האורה לבד, לא בחינס העצמס, כנ"ל, עניין הממוצע. Avo batoira eina mamutza mafsik. Now, on the contrary, mischabrim nishomis Yisrael b'chinas atzmas tzei baruch. So here I'm going to have to choose the fact that I feel it's my duty to go to this thing tonight, so I'm going to have to pause now. But I'm going to leave you guys slightly tantalized, but it's one of the tricks of Hashpoya, because it makes people think and not sleep good at nights, etc., etc. But here we see this concept of a mamutza, which is mafsik, even though it joins together, but it's like in the middle, and then a mamutza, which brings the two parties and brings them upon him together, and doesn't interrupt between them. And That's the mamutza of Torah, is Davka mamutza which joins them together, Achim dik, and the ordinary mamutza is a mamutza hamafsik, even though it causes them to join together. In the middle you've got these different dagas which move lower down, one from the other. But in Torah, the connection between Yidden with the Eibishter, Al Yidei Torah, is a essential connection that once they rise up into that level of Torah, and the Eibishter literally finds himself in the Torah, and they meet up directly, without any interrupting Indian, directly with the Eibishter himself. And that's a bigger reason considerable. We'll see about that in Milchem tomorrow. But that is the difference between a mamutza hamafsik and a mamutza machaber. That the mutza joins them together, mamish, or it's mafsik. But even when it's mafsik, it doesn't really interrupt. It just until you get from one side of the mamutza to the other. There's like uridas and madregas in the middle. In the mamutza Torah, you elevate up to a certain point. The average comes to a certain point, and that's where you meet, and that's like a sort of a beer on what we said before, but again to the link of the Eivishter with Neshama Tziyas Ruel, and that's called a mamutza hamachaber. So no doubt you already heard the famous words of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe said that Hanemus Rebbe, he's a mamutza hamachaber. You heard no doubt the famous. So there was some on Yud-Shvat, second Yud-Shvat, the first Yud-Shvat, which one it was. And it caused a lot of sensations, etc., etc. And one can ask on that a certain shaila, but we'll deal with that. But obviously there's a very clear teretz b'negel there, and we'll deal with that tomorrow and in future and developing episodes.
We're bringing tomorrow, no?
Yeah, but we're going to have to have a shiur first, and we'll have it probably earlier, like we did tonight. But tomorrow there'll be a farbrengen, but we're going to learn first.